First World War. Now in 1934 he's made Master of Ordnance. Let's build infantry support tanks. So we start with the Matilda 1. That's the little vehicle that's at the head of this column. We move on to another infantry support tank, the Matilda 2, designed and built in 2 years. So very impressive scale by a brand new manufacturer, the Vulcan Works, that had made engineering or mainly railway carriages before that. And they are going to be the tanks that are going to lead the infantry over the battlefield. Now we all know that the Second World War starts off not like that at all. It's a war of movement, speedy movement. So we need cruiser tanks as well. They are being designed, and we are so lucky in the Second World War as well, because of course we go to America in 1940 and we try and buy tanks off the Americans. And one of the first tanks we buy is this M3 Grant tank. Vickers, the famous shipbuilder, armaments manufacturer, Vickers designed a tank called the Valentine, and that tank is put together from other models in 1939, and we accept it as another version of an infantry tank. Now we're lucky here today, we've got John Pearson's Valentine tank. It's the one that's got the canvas around the outside. That's a DD version. World War II is Valentine tanks. 8,000 Valentines are made in different models. And we use them as well. In the very first instance, we use Valentines out in North Africa. It's supposed to be another infantry tank, like our Matilda 1 and Matilda 2. Thick armour, we end up using them like a cruiser tank. Very good tank, very reliable, sees service in many different roles. Using them for training on, they're not used on D-Day, we use the Sherman because it's more effective that way. Now if you can pick them out as they go round, if I say it's another green tank, you're not going to know, are you? But one of the tanks down there, the following the Valentine, is the Churchill. And again, it's another infantry tank. It's a tank to support the infantry in the attack. And this is going to be our third model infantry tank. Because of the fighting in France, they changed its specification. Our first designed, we made the first two models. This is coming round now is the Mark III model. A genuinely rarity here. Only 600 of these are made. It's got very thick armour. There it is with the 13 on the side of the turret. It starts off with a 2-pounder gun. It ends up with a howitzer in the hull as well. We get rid of this on the Mark III. We put a 6-pounder gun on and then a bored out 6-pounder that's called a 75mm. This, when they first gave the manual out, it said on page 1, don't worry, we know this has got problems, but we think you better have it now just in case. Service in World War II, we use it for engineer variants, the famous Avery armoured vehicle, flame-throwing crocodile, and the gun tank itself supporting the tank infantry brigades. They see amazing service flywheel. You just literally put a little lever, the gear you want to go into, stamp on the clutch pedal, and off you go like that. So the Daimler sophisticated piece of kit can go just as fast backwards as it can forwards. And interestingly, when you see that drive around at the moment, we're going to see it with an M8 Greyhound that was, again, an American armoured car. We always liked the American kit, but the Daimler was oodles better than the M8 Greyhound. The British Army did not want the Greyhound. Paper-thin armour underneath, not particularly good across country, and only a few units use that Greyhound. 6x6, all driven wheels on it. Well, before, the Germans are starting to use things like 88mm guns against the 78mm frontal armour, and 88mm will really penetrate that as a gun. to America, they start getting going on tank programs. They're about to build a tank called the M2 medium. They end up building that M3 Grant tank, which you can see still down there at the other end of the field. Same issues as the Sherman. There's not enough. This one's got a radial, it's got an aeroplane engine, the R975 engine in the back. There's not enough aeroplane engines to power the vehicles around. So the Americans end up putting different models of engine, and they're learning how to do casting. They've got the French engineers who have made it out of France. As France falls in May 1940, they go to America and they help the Americans do the castings on these early M3 tanks. 5mm gun in the hull and a 37mm anti-tank gun in the turret. It's got a crew of 6, 2 guys to load the guns in the hull. We don't like the American policy of having the radio in the hull, so we ask for changes. A guy called Carr redesigns, British engineer, redesigns the turret and put the radio in this new enlarged turret on the top. And that's what makes it a Grant tank in British service as opposed to the American Lee with the bigger cupola. Now this Grant, it's new here at the museum. It's part of the Bill Bannister's collection. It's come from Australia, the Sherman tank that you're going to be seeing a little bit later on. Same engines, same transmissions, lots of the same issues with the Grant that we'll see come out in the Sherman. Now that Churchill tank, the Mark III, the Churchill as I mentioned, it first goes out to North Africa. It sees service at the Battle of Valentine. The American Grant tanks, they first see service with British forces before Valentine. We've got about 600 by the Battle of Valentine. We're just trying out the Churchill. Luftwaffe can dominate the skies. The Germans are going to come across the channel, and the consequences of that. It's only about 1942 we really get our act together with tanks again. The Americans are turning up with their Shermans, their tanks again properly. We've been building the tanks we had at the beginning of the war, the Valentines again. We've been keeping going with some of the Churchills. We keep tanks in production just to keep the factories going that we're only going to use for training, which sounds a terrible waste at the time, but then by 44 we're starting to get our act together again. One of the tanks that's going to come into service is the Cromwell, the version of it there called the Centaur in the middle of the mound there, the Comet behind based on the Cromwell, and these end up being rather impressive tanks when we get going again. Infantry tank, that Churchill, you get the impression it's a bit solid, and it's solid because if you're helping the infantry advance, you're bound to get the fire coming at you. And so with those two vehicles there, we need a more powerful engine. So a guy called Rupted Rowbottom has got a Spitfire engine from a crashed Spitfire, and he has a go at it. And he changes the famous Merlin that was in the Lancaster bomber and the Spitfire, and they call that the Meteor. 680 horsepower, fantastic power for a tank to be able to go off and do the business at speed. We again, and equally, because it's more powerful, we can add a bit more armour to the vehicles as well. But really, this is a vehicle about reconnaissance and reporting back. In fact, some of these, they took the turrets off, so the guys inside had good all-round visibility. On that Daimler there, they called those sawn-offs or sods, shorn-off Daimlers, SOD. And so it's just as fast backwards, so again, think reconnaissance. The M8 Greyhound down the other end there started off, it was meant to be an American tank destroyer. It was going to replace a truck they put an anti-tank gun on. By the time it's looking to come into service, They've got 3 designs. The Ford model is chosen to build. By the time it comes into service, they realise this is not going to take on enemy tanks. Let's use it for reconnaissance. And the downside of that, if you are reconnaissance, you're the vehicle that might be going over there meeting the mine first. So American crews, 4-man crew, they sometimes put sandbags across the floor of this vehicle to give them a bit more protection that way. 37mm, the size of the hole at the end of the barrel, small anti-tank gun, outclassed quite quickly, but can still do damage against soft-skin vehicles, etc. 2 guys in the turret, commander and the gunner, actually 55 miles an hour. That's a fair old lick for an armoured vehicle. So they could travel good distance in mud or cross country, not so good that way. Now coming round is what many of you might think is a Cromwell tank. It's part of a cruiser tank series that Britain puts together, hoping it's going to go into service in about the tank design department of Woolwich comes up with the turret. You can see the rivets, it's on a framework, and they build 3 different versions of this vehicle. They build these with the idea that if the Meteor engine's ready, we'll take out the Liberties and put those in the back instead. So this version with the Liberty engine is called the Centaur. A number of them are made. We don't actually use them in combat in this form. We use the ones with the Cromwell tank with that Meteor engine instead. It's got speed. And again, mobility means that when we break out from the same river, we go faster up to the Dutch border than the Germans did in 1940 coming the other way from Germany to the French coast. So, you know, they really showed their worth then. It's not just about the size of the gun, but we'll see that later in the day, size does matter. But that was a cracking use of these fast Cromwell tanks. In the background, we're designing a fantastic tank. You'll see that later today. Not going to be ready yet, so we do this as an interim model. This has got Cromwell parts on it, but things as well that we've been able to pick up on during 1943. In other words, we need a more powerful gun to penetrate the armour of German tanks like the Panther. This is called a 77mm high velocity gun. It fires the same projectile that goes out the famous 17-pounder. Don't try and hide that noise. It's part of its effect in many ways. Thick armour on the front, much better in terms of protection. It's got a phone on the back, something we learned from the Desert War. Let the infantry be able to talk to the commander inside. And we make these and they get out to British forces in December of 1944. Some units, 7th Armoured Division, starting to convert over to the Comet tank, as it's called. Actually, they hand them back in because when the Germans attacked with the Battle of the Bulge, we thought it's much better to send the guys into action in tanks they're used to. So they're reissued in the 75mm that's on the Panther. So again, once we were back in the tank game, we knew what we were doing, but that reason we had a period in the middle of the war, if you understand it that way, there's a very good reason for that. The Russians didn't worry about a navy or an air force, they just built tanks. America, not being bombed like we were, could concentrate on production all the time. There is a good reason in many ways why Britain's tanks have this stumbling period in the middle of the war before we come out again with Comet's great tank. The next one that we're going to come out with, of course, becomes a world beater, and that's the famous Centurion. Misses the war by a couple of weeks. Operation Sentry, we sent them all out there, and we're going to talk about the Centurions a little bit later on today, and you'll see them there. So it wasn't that we didn't know how to build tanks, it was just in the war years we had other priorities that other nations didn't always have those same priorities that way. So this lovely Comet driving around always sounds wonderful. British tank to be built with that vertical plate on the front so we could fit a Beta machine gun. When you look afterwards, why didn't you use my sloped armour on the front? Well, we get rid of the Beta, that had to have a 90-degree plate. They do away with that, so when the Centurion comes along, you'll have that lovely sloped front glacis plate, adds to the protection levels of the tank.